In this video, we're going to cover using equations to define some of the dimensions of a part. So if I'm in a sketch, and let's say I'm working with a rectangle, and I want the rectangle to have a relationship between one side relative to the other. We can do one type of relationship, an equal relationship. We could select both sides and use our equal, right? That would be one way. But what if I don't want them to be equal? I don't want to be a square. I want to have, say, one side be 1.5 times the other side. So let's start dimensioning. Let's say I make the width 4 inches, and then I make the height 6 inches. But I want to make it, I'm thinking I'm going to maybe adjust this part in the future, or I'm going to add configurations to make a number of different sizes, and I want the scale of this, the ratio of one side to the other, always to be the same. That's where equations come in. So if you have noticed, when you double click on an equation, it tells you what the value of the equation is. It also tells you a name for the equation. So in this case, this is the first dimension. Sorry, I've been saying equation, I meant dimension. This is the first dimension that I've added in Sketch 2. So it's D1 at Sketch 2. And then if I look at this one, I'll see that it's D2 at Sketch 2. So it's pretty intuitive. They just keep going through D1, D2, D3. So let's say instead of 6 inches, I want this dimension to always be 1.5 times what the first dimension was. I can do that, and that's called an equation, and we start all equations by typing in the equal sign, similar to like in Excel. So here I can say equal to, and then click on the dimension, the first one, or I could type it in if I wanted to, if I knew the name of the other one, and then I'm going to say times 1.5, and check that. And so it's still at 6 inches, and now you can see it has the summation sign in front of the dimension, and that summation sign is the sign that it is defined by an equation. So now if I change this dimension, the 4 inches, let's say I change it to 2 inches, you can see that the other dimension scaled by that 1.5 times factor. Okay, so that's showing how I can use equations within a sketch, and I can do math functions, you know, like the multiply, divide, add, etc. There's also a number of trig functions, etc. in here that you can use. Okay, so let's leave that as that, and then let's extrude out. So here as well, I can also tie it to the equations from my previous thing. So here, instead of using a depth, if I want to set it to maybe it extrudes out half of the length of that first side, I can again here start with an equal sign, then click on the dimension I want to use as part of my equation, and let's say divided by 2 now. Okay, and so in this case that's 1 inch. So you can see now if I edit that dimension in the sketch, watch what happens to the whole thing. So let's go back up to 4. You can see, and now I rebuild it. It all scaled the same way. So if we look at our definition, the depth of it would be 2 inches. So let's go back and look at that and measure that. 2 inches. Okay, so that's a brief introduction to equations. We can also have multiple equations in basically a table that allows us to adjust many equations at once, and we'll look at that in a separate video. But this is a good introduction to equations. The last thing I want to show you while we're talking about equations is if you look up in the feature manager now, you'll see there's a new folder called equations, and if I right click on that and manage equations, it shows all of the equations that I have included so far. So there's one for the value for D2 at Sketch 2 is equal to 1.5 times the value of D1, and then in the extrude, dimension 1 is equal to dimension 1 from Sketch 2 divided by 2. So this is another way I could edit all of them at once. And over here in this last column, it shows you what that evaluates to right now. So right now those end up being 6 and 2 inches. Again, if we go back and edit this down to, let's say, 1 inch now, and then, oops, go look at the equations again, it'll show me how it's adjusted all those values. And you can also add variables. If you, let's say, rather than having equation or dimension 1 in Sketch 1 be what I wanted to base everything on, let's say I just knew I wanted to do everything, all those dimensions as a multiple of some variable that I was going to change based on some design factor. Say I have some other part that I work with and I want to base everything off of some specific dimension of that part. I could define a variable that I could say like length S1 and then put in a value for it. So it's 1.25, let's say. Then if I come back into my sketch and I want to edit that sketch, let's look at dimension 1. If I edit that, and instead of putting in a number, I just start typing length S1, you can see it came up with my variables. And so now everything, and if I rebuild, all my equations still work, but now they're based on that one variable. So if I go back into the variables, I could change just that one to, let's say, 3.75, and everything else will update when it rebuilds. And so if I measure it now, oh, that one didn't update. Why didn't? Let's go back. Look at the sketch, see why that didn't update. Thought I made it equal to, oh, I guess I didn't put it in there, equals length S1. Okay, let's try that one more time now. Go back and edit it in the equations. There we go. Now it's updating based on that equation. Okay, so that's our introduction to equations. In our next video, we'll look at using design tables to go even further with equations. Hope that's helpful.